On September 26th, Paul Thomas Anderson's 10th film, One Battle After Another, hit theaters worldwide with Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead. Loosely adapted from Thomas Pynchon's novel Vineland, it's part dark comedy, part razor-sharp political satire, and at times even a full-on action-packed thriller, where the reckless drive to achieve a goal borders on the outright madness of the idea itself. Packed with chases, action, suspense, and humor on the one hand, and reflections on the collapse and possible salvation of an entire nation on the other, the film is already being hailed as the biggest premiere of the fall and a likely frontrunner at the upcoming Oscars. It debuted with a Rotten Tomatoes score of over 96% fresh. The film was meant to be an epic, timely, and deeply relevant statement, complete with elements of family drama. But are these glowing reviews, along with the weight of its message, perhaps a little inflated, much like its budget? It's a tough question, especially for a movie that can't quite be called a traditional blockbuster. Usually, a DiCaprio film signals an intriguing project. In essence, these are festival-level productions that combine top-tier components, including sharp screenwriting backed by serious funding. They almost inevitably win over mainstream audiences while delivering strong thematic depth beneath the adrenaline and spectacle. But what happens when a revolution fails? While the revolutionaries themselves survive, still free, do they retreat to some quiet corner, silently watching as a broken world with its despised order rushes past them? Or do they turn to the next generation with hope, saying, maybe it's you who'll finally fix this, free the oppressed, and bring justice back? How could that not hold enormous dramatic potential? For Paul Thomas Anderson, One Battle After Another isn't his first dive into Thomas Pynchon's world. Back in 2014, he adapted the hazy, eccentric Inherent Vice. This time, however, he's taken only the rough outline of the characters and the skeleton of events from Vineland. Pynchon's original novel was set at the dawn of Ronald Reagan's presidency and centered on the sense of defeat, or even outright betrayal, of the ideals of freedom that the Flower Children, the Weathermen, and the Black Panthers believed they had been fighting for throughout the previous 2 decades. Anderson's modern adaptation digs deeper into the backstory, but most of the characters have new names, certain plot lines are stripped away, fresh emphases are introduced, and the action is shifted squarely into the era we're living in now. The disillusionment and confusion that defined the late 60s hippies are transposed onto the mindset of protesters from the late 2000s through the early 2020s. On screen, the faction known as French 75 acts far more aggressively, resorting to sudden terror and smash-and-grab tactics, unlike the relatively harmless Occupy Wall Street movement. But for Anderson, the key point is to show how characters of this mold slog through their day-to-day lives, haunted by the same question. How do you live in a world that only got worse after we tried to change it? One Battle After Another never drops the names of real-world politicians, yet the context is unmistakable and its nerve easy to feel. We see detention camps for undocumented migrants at the United States border, violent police raids that are barely disguised depictions of ICE operations, uncompromising clashes between protesters and law enforcement reminiscent of the National Guard being deployed in rebellious cities, and the backroom dealings of those in power as they shape society and the entire structure of the state. For Anderson, the project stands out in several ways. First, it's by far his most expensive film. Warner Brothers handed him a blockbuster-sized budget, with around $20 million reportedly going straight to DiCaprio's paycheck. Second, it marks his first true action film, and only the second movie since Punch Drunk Love to be set in the present day. Up until now, the director had been defined by his retro sensibilities and fixation on the past. From Boogie Nights, which DiCaprio famously passed on due to his career-altering turn in Titanic, to Magnolia, There Will Be Blood, and Phantom Thread, it always seemed as though Anderson was waiting for the right moment to make a bold statement about the present, maybe even to take a peek into tomorrow. In a way, this feels like a creative manifesto, something comparable to Quentin Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, also starring DiCaprio. But unlike older Tarantino, Anderson has now reached his 10th feature. To bring this long-gestating vision to life, he secured $130 million from the studio, shot on with a wide Vista Vision format and IMAX release, and brought in a cast stacked with A-list Hollywood talent. In the 2000s, Ghetto Pat, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, was a demolition expert in the leftist radical group French 75. Their operations included raids to free Mexican migrants from detention camps, planting bombs in banks and government buildings, all in the name of vengeance against wealthy globalists and to destabilize the hated system. Noble intentions, perhaps, yet carried out with methods that were anything but noble, inevitably harming not just bloated capitalists but ordinary people as well. The anarchist cell was largely made up of fierce, charismatic black women in their prime, so it's little surprise when Pat ends up in a torrid affair with one of the group's leaders, Perfidia Beverly Hills. During one raid, she crosses paths with a ruthless, fascist-leaning colonel, played with icy precision by Sean Penn. Yet Stephen Lockjaw, a hardline proponent of strict immigration control, harbors a secret fetish for sexual humiliation. More than capturing his defiant adversary, he longs to take her to bed, and in the end, he manages both. Perfidia's secret passionate affair with her class enemy spirals into the collapse of the entire revolutionary cell. Betrayal, arrests, some comrades vanishing into hiding, others hauled off in chains. Pat, having traded his wild youth for fatherhood, raises Perfidia's daughter alone, though he has no idea he might not even be the real father. After the downfall of French 75, his remaining allies help him slip away from the feds with the child, retreating to the fictional town of Backton Cross in Southern California, a mostly Latino community where they live under assumed names, Bob and Willa Ferguson. 16 years later, Pat has gone underground, keeping his head down, rarely leaving the house, numbing himself with old movies and light drugs, refusing to engage with the world's changes. His only tether to ordinary life is the nagging fatherly routine, lecturing his teenage daughter about her friends, her phone, and the need for extreme caution in everything she does. But the ghosts of the past catch up with him, dragging Bob by the scruff of the neck out of his self-imposed fog and back into a world where the ideals of youth lie trampled. The country is run by despised yuppies, and his old comrades lurk in California's shadows, occasionally mounting faint echoes of resistance. True to the genre, he must save his daughter from mortal danger, though she may not need much saving and come face to face with his ideological nemesis, Lockjaw. Yet the long-anticipated climactic showdown between the weary, fragile, often hysterical protagonist shuffling around in a bathrobe and the merciless, racist colonel never actually materializes. Instead, Anderson resolves it in a more grounded, prosaic way, a virtuoso choice that subverts expectations while staying true to life. It's hard to believe it's been more than a decade since Leonardo DiCaprio won his Oscar. Since then, one of Hollywood's most beloved and popular actors of his generation has grown even more selective about the roles he takes, with new projects arriving only every few years. And it seems Leo has shifted course. He no longer seems interested in playing the slick leading men, the heartthrobs and smooth operators. Instead, he's gravitated toward more complex, layered portrayals of broken, often failed men, a fading, insecure actor in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a timid, indecisive scientist in Don't Look Up, a pitiful small-time crook in Killers of the Flower Moon, and now a loving but ineffectual, unfulfilled father in one battle after another. This performance isn't exactly a career-defining or transformative turn for the actor millions have long been considered a master. He throws himself into it emotionally and fits naturally into the edgy, darkly comic tone of the role. Still, there's the nagging sense Leo is capable of far more than playing a frazzled, sad clown, wandering the city in a filthy bathrobe, hair tied up in an unkempt bun, brandishing a phone charger as he hunts for outlets, or melting down in long, hysterical tirades after forgetting a password because he's literally drunk and smoked away his brain cells. While Bob Ferguson isn't a carbon copy of Tarantino's Rick Dalton, DiCaprio imbues him with similar traits. A broken, world-weary man with a kind of awkward charm, prone to shouting fits, lapses into comic absurdity, and moments that border on clownish. In some ways, he's playing a variation of the cult classic Big Lebowski figure from the Coen brothers, just drifting along, not thinking much about the future. First, his dominant partner made the choices for him, and later, his precociously smart and self-reliant daughter did. On the one hand, the star doesn't hog the spotlight, giving room for other characters to shine. At the same time, he fades somewhat to the sidelines in the film's first half, overshadowed by the cold charisma of Lockjaw, the cartoonishly menacing colonel, and his volatile chemistry with the fiery, hypersexual Perfidia. Later, he even cedes ground to the sheer strength of will shown by his on-screen daughter, played by Chase Infinity. Anderson clearly crafted DiCaprio's character with great care and affection. This is a man who curses America's founding fathers without a second thought and swipes glasses from a corner mini-mart for a makeshift disguise. You get the sense that a paranoid, anarchic energy is baked deep into his DNA. Still, it's hard not to hope that before long, we'll get to see Leo once again in the kinds of roles that defined him in the late 90s and early 2000s. The complete opposite of the screw-up dad Sean Penn plays will no doubt convince audiences with the sheer force of his performance, and it's hard to imagine him walking away without at least a Best Supporting Actor nomination. Penn takes Lockjaw beyond the usual bag of villain cliches, grounding his negative drive in something the viewer can actually grasp, a mark of quality when it comes to portraying an antagonist. He's a twitchy, teeth-grinding alpha, almost cartoonish at times, pacing with a menacing strut in either military uniform or a razor-sharp business suit, moving with ruthless determination, desperate to be accepted into a secretive racist society that runs politics, business, and money under the codename the Christmas Adventurers Club. On the surface, he's the embodiment of the regime, a bulked-up 50-something soldier who sees the world in black and white, built on the oldest of tenets: Christianity, conservatism, survival of the fittest, and the belief that might makes right. But hidden in his holster is not a gun, but a bunch of repressed sexual drives and complexes. The possible existence of a daughter from a black woman completely shatters his chances of rising through the lodge's hierarchy and becomes the central trigger for the entire story. Lockjaw's situation is, in a way, metaphorical. The revolution, embodied in the body and spirit of Perfidia, ignites in him an intense sexual charge. The outcome, a daughter, places him in a Greek tragedy dilemma. What if he, the enforcer of the underground's destruction, is actually the father of the next revolution, embodied by the young but already furious Willa? Every failed Sean Penn project of recent years, and his status as an almost written-off actor, seems to have been worth it for this fully realized, borderline self-parodic role, a sly nod to his earlier hyper-masculine parts in Sweet and Lowdown, U-Turn, or Mystic River. It's as if he's still playing in his old wheelhouse, but this time far more naturally, far more convincingly. Benicio del Toro also shines as the unflappable sensei Sergio St. Carlos, who trains Willa in martial arts at the local gym while simultaneously presiding over a massive family syndicate of undocumented Latin American settlers. His electrifying calmness echoes his recent work with another visionary director, Wes Anderson, in the star-studded Phoenician scheme. At times, del Toro's charisma and grace even eclipse Leonardo DiCaprio himself in their shared scenes, embodying the ideals of solidarity and tight-knit underground communities. Tana Taylor also nails her part and sticks in the memory. Her Perfidia Beverly Hills is a wild, explosive, sensual force of nature, a fiery storm of sexuality that destroys everything in her path and refuses to tolerate restraint or monotony. A heavily pregnant heroine blazing away with an assault rifle became a striking protest image used in the film's promotional posters, and as we later learn, this visual resonates culturally when mirrored almost shot for shot years later by her grown-up daughter, symbolizing the eternal youth of revolutionary ideals. Still, the director's attitude toward the motley crew of rebels, from hipsters to nuns, is far from unambiguous. One battle after another could just as well be retitled one betrayal after another. Under security forces' pressure, the clear-eyed insurgents collapse one by one, selling each other out again and again. And yet, Anderson insists, there is no other choice but resistance, gently transforming the political into the lyrical. Structurally, the film feels uneven. The first half drags overloaded and sluggish, with events unfolding slowly and character backstories left blurred and indistinct. In the second half, though, the pace quickens, conflicts heat up, and the mounting tension keeps us engaged enough to overlook the rushed, time-jumping, space-shifting, and scale-hopping editing. Paul Thomas Anderson has always been known for weaving together cohesive dramatic tapestries on screen, infused with his signature strain of suspense. Here we get ominous military espionage imagery in shadowy spaces, mysterious secret factions, hypnotically convincing performances from Penn and DiCaprio, powerful close-ups, and an expressive minor key score that instills a constant state of unease. Johnny Greenwood's pulsating, almost trance-like music ratchets up the pressure to the point where you find yourself begging for the suspenseful scenes to finally break and release. The action sequences, especially the chases, are nothing short of dazzling. Anderson directs them differently than the usual genre heavyweights, but the spectacle and intensity remain high. Whether it's a frantic rooftop scramble or a near surreal automotive duel to the death on a desert highway twisting like a serpent's coils, the film manages to be both fatalistically serious and absurdly funny at the same time. And as becomes increasingly clear, it's not so much about revolutionary terror as it is about fatherhood. Parenthood, above all, is about responsibility, and a father's real task is not to drill his children into readiness for a decisive battle, but to recognize that the heir can figure things out on their own and choose which side they belong to. The themes of parents and children, and of moral choice, remain only partially explored, if only because the protagonist continues to live from one accident to the next, even after the critical trial. His way of life hasn't changed at all, except that he's now a little more willing to let his daughter hang out with her friends. We all understand perfectly well what values Anderson's new film is trying to communicate. Let's be honest, we've seen this played out far too often, especially in recent years, both on the big screen and across the output of popular streaming platforms. At this point, there's little reason to dive deep into meditations on freedom, the essence of democracy and justice, the degree of guilt borne by white heterosexual Protestant men, or the struggle of women for equality, immigrants for recognition, and trans people for self-affirmation. Thankfully, the director doesn't overload the movie with agenda-driven preaching to the point of unwatchability, and considering how openly his personal views are on display, that restraint alone is worthy of respect. The subtext, critiquing today's era of division, atomization, the rightward shift in politics, and its flaws, is easy enough to grasp. What's harder is genuinely empathizing with characters who feel hyperbolized, overly direct, and deliberately one-note. Still, Anderson's artistry deserves acknowledgement for creating something painfully topical, despite it being an adaptation of a 40-year-old novel. Given that the filming wrapped before the 2024 presidential election, it's clear he wasn't chasing the summons, he was anticipating them, and he nailed it. Just look at the scenes of police and National Guard crackdowns on migrant communities and protesters, which play like dispatches from a current newsreel. The figure of Lockjaw, embodying Anderson's trademark obsession with monomaniacal characters, and the shadowy order of religious white supremacist zealots he represents, who believe they're the ones keeping America afloat, serve as a direct and unmistakable statement against the rising tide of right-wing sentiment in the country. But the true emotional engine of the film, beneath all its declarations about freedom, is the question of kinship. For Penn's Lockjaw, kinship is rooted in the fascist credo of blood and soil. For DiCaprio's Bob Ferguson, ideological kinship matters more than biology. When the question of Willa's true paternity arises, the colonel forcibly demands a DNA test, ready to eliminate anything that might block his career path. Bob, on the other hand, doesn't hesitate. He tosses his rifle into a stolen car and rushes to save the girl in danger. Penn personifies the 20th century father, strong, domineering, aggressive, demanding that his children mirror him. DiCaprio is Father 2.0, a figure of the 21st century. He squandered much of his life, and it's not even clear who's really taking care of whom, him or his daughter. Yet in crucial moments, he manages to summon enough love to act fearlessly and to place his daughter above any ideology. Because Anderson had carried this idea around for nearly 2 decades before finally realizing its time had come, we've ended up with a film that erases nearly all distance between screen and reality, a statement piece, deeply personal and charged with a spectrum of emotions. For many, it will no doubt leave conflicted impressions about the morality the director wants to impress upon us. But it's hard to deny that a project like this, from a recognized master, is an engrossing, tense, and unusual spectacle, truly auteur-driven popular cinema that fuses together genres and styles. One battle after another paints a harsh but strikingly real portrait of contemporary America, caught in the vice between increasingly fascistic, uncompromising security forces and far-left activists willing to embrace methods of terror. On the surface, it seems like the perfect gray versus gray conflict, with no true good guys or bad guys, and the only salvation for the United States lying in some balanced, pragmatic centrist approach. Yet, even from the first encounters with its characters, it's clear the filmmakers lean toward one side, a sympathy that only deepens as the story unfolds. This, despite the obvious moral ambiguity on both sides, an ambiguity that prevents any real unity or strength from ever taking root in the country. What ultimately saves the film is Anderson's trademark irony, which prevents it from being pigeonholed as just another political thriller. Instead, it plays as a sly, mocking neo-Western, stylish and expansive, though unlikely to be remembered as a landmark cinematic event. Still, it surpasses something like Eddington in terms of social commentary, precisely because it doesn't stop at satire and sharp criticism but goes further, delivering a clear assertion. In the 2020s, politics is always personal, and it begins not with the crowd but with the willpower of a single individual. Ari Aster, for all his talent, never fully managed to communicate that in his own work, nor did he allow audiences the freedom to decide for themselves where the good truly lies. Paul Thomas Anderson's films have always been steeped in tension and unease. He never lets his audience forget about the imbalance of power and resources, or the injustice of a system that demands resistance. The most powerful strength of one battle after another, however, is the hope it leaves behind. Hope that whatever ideals we fight for, every struggle will eventually pay off. If not in our own lifetimes, then in the future of those who inherit what we've left behind.